All right, welcome back to the CU Morning Show. Now we're going to have our first conversation, but before that, let's look at the BRICS summit concluded last Thursday as the bloc, which included Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa, is now set to expand after inviting 6 more countries.
The 6 aforementioned nations invited to join BRICS include Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. This expansion is part of a bid to bolster the financial muscle of emerging economies. Meanwhile, the leaders of BRICS have adopted a new declaration following the summit.
The 26-page declaration includes calls for the peaceful resolution of global conflicts, specifically diplomatic talks to rescue the Niger crisis and ceasefire in Sudan. BRICS leaders have also agreed to push for the reform of economic policies and manage the impact of rising geopolitical tensions on global financial stability. BRICS leaders have also agreed on plans to accelerate growth and sustainable development for member states.
Meanwhile, Indonesian President Joko Widodo has confirmed that the country has refrained from joining BRICS, at least for now. He said that Indonesia is still making careful considerations and reviews regarding potentially joining the bloc.
Nevertheless, President Widodo emphasized that Indonesia maintains good relations with BRICS, especially in terms of economy and trade.
And we are now living in a world filled with many different blocs, from the G7 to the G20, ASEAN, and many, many others. Where does BRICS bloc actually stand, and what is its significance?
Now, to know more, we are joined by Gracia Paramitha, who is postgraduate lecturer from the University of Indonesia and was also a guest scholar at the BRICS Postgraduate Forums. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us on the Sunday morning. I know it's bright and early for you, and glad to have you here in the studio finally.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right.
Now, first question is, can you just give us like a brief explanation just to clarify it better for our audience that what is BRICS bloc and what significance and position does it hold for the world today?
So in history, the term called BRIC, so it started from 4 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, was coined by an economist from Goldman Sachs called Jim O'Neill. And he predicted in 2001 that these 4 countries will be the major economic countries, or like the emerging powerful economy in the world, or at least in the next decade. And then in 2007, these 4 countries started to do an informal, like sort of the conversation and then meeting with some foreign ministers or other relevant ministers. And in 2009, they decided to create more well-organized, or sort of like the formal meeting until it's becoming the first BRICS summit. And in 2010, South Africa was finally joined by the recommendation of China and other decisions from the other BRICS members, and that's why it's finally like a firm called BRICS with 5 member states in 2010. So that's how the journey, the BRICS was, started, and how BRICS actually tried to contend the Western's economic powerful influence, and also to, I think, to make a balance of
Balance
power.
it out, I was going to say.
Yeah, because there has been a long-term or long journey that U.S. after the Cold War became like a victory, and also the hegemony of the major trade and other economic transactions. So this BRICS tried to counter, or maybe tried to reduce the hegemony, because there are China, Russia, or even India tried to being more competitive with U.S. or even other Western countries. But I think BRICS can be like the club within a club, because if we look broader in the G20 itself, all of the BRICS members are a part of the G20.
Right.
And BRICS itself also tried to contend or be more competitive with the G7. If we look at the demography and also the representative of GDP, yes, BRICS is much more higher than G7. So it represents 26 of the world economy, or specifically the world trade, and also represent 40% of the world's populations. But if we look deeper about the economic gap, the poverty, there are more complexities within BRICS rather than G7 or G20. So this is sort of like a new star right now, rising up by seeing the BRICS, but we cannot just like relying on them and then, Indonesia just go further and go ahead with the BRICS.
Right.
It needs further steps to wait and see and consider whether BRICS will be more strategic for Indonesia or even for ASEAN and other multilateral institutions.
And you mentioned, how there's different parameters for comparing this
Yeah.
bloc as opposed to Western blocs, for example, comparing it by GDP or by population. That is vastly different. How does, in your perspective, how does this compare to the other Western blocs, BRICS itself?
So I think I will start with the population first. Demographically speaking, both G20, G7, or G20 and BRICS are mainly the same because China and India, like the key huge populations are there. But if we look at the GDP and especially what I said like non or informal economy activities, BRICS are slightly higher than the G7, especially if we talk about MSMEs, micro, small, medium enterprises, or the applications or digital tools from big market. So that's how to compare the GDP or even more specifically into informal economies. But again, US or other Western sites are still inevitable to compete if we talk about political economy in defense, for example, or military assets. So that's why BRICS are still way lower or maybe a bit outpaces to compete comprehensively to the Western's GDP overall, or even to be, the next star after Cold War or maybe in the next 22nd centuries. It needs a lot of tasks, especially to solve their own internal problems.
Right.
There are a lot of more complex internal problems among the members. Right. India with China with their territorial disputes, or even China, Russia, although China tried to back up a lot during Russian-Ukraine cases, but still they also have some economic competitive, and also South Africa to keep performing much better than India and China. There are some complications to decide firmly that BRICS are well performed. It is a long way to do that.
Never thought about it that way. It's actually quite true.
Right. So in that note, it's kind of interesting. You mentioned earlier that BRICS is like a club within a club.
Yes.
Which is the members are. Is this something that? What kind of purpose that we're hoping that we're gonna see from BRICS? Is it just something that? Because you mentioned earlier, like even the country within the countries, they still have this problems within themselves. So is this something that is just they're trying to showcase like who we are? We represent
the
more.
others.
Right. We represent 40% of the population in the world, or is there something that we're hoping that's gonna come out from the BRICS when this all go well, or I don't know what's gonna happen next?
I think there will be 2 points that we can see the good sides to build up or increase BRICS. First, it's about nation branding from each members, and secondly, it's more about to again counterbalance of power, like to create balancing of the powerful economies rather than Western's hegemony. But if we look further about the geopolitical tensions, either the internal BRICS or outside BRICS, and also the climate emergencies topics, how the funding, like the investments from BRICS try to deal with other global challenges, that's way, that it needs more identifications to prepare. And actually there is not just BRICS as a club within the club, there's another one called MICTA, Mexico, Indonesia, Australia, Turkey, and this is also another, maybe another star maybe in the next few years, but still creating this label would be good for soft power diplomacy, like to revive their nation brandings. But if we look further about the security, there is a term in international relations studies called prisoner's dilemma. So in one hand, the BRICS members might be powerful to show off their, a lot of assets and even maybe increase their defense. But in another way, or other hand, it's also like a trap that they cannot accumulate their power with the neighbors because there's still, again, internal disputes, or there is another complexity to define how successful to become a powerful economic countries. So I think that's the reason why making a new organizations or new label within the club is very critical. It's not easy to claim or perform that they are better than the other clubs, but it needs some steps. And if we reflect to Indonesian participations, I think it's good to start by being a spectator, observer, and then we try to do initiatives, or let's just say to build a friendship instead of formal economic or formal security partnerships. And it's also good to revive the spirit of Bandung Asian African Conference, a long history between Indonesia and South Africa in particular, or even with other South countries. I think that's the main agenda why BRICS are very important or matters to Indonesia, and why Indonesia should be, aligned as well with some BRICS agenda.
I see it like joining a gym. You take a trial first for a couple of weeks. You don't just immediately sign up for a year, right? There's a lot. I personally see a lot of similarities between Africa and Indonesia, especially both being quickly developing in recent years as well. Let's actually touch on that a little bit. We'll rewind a little bit and talk about Indonesia's decision. It's coming quite late in President Jokowi's second term. Again, relations have been good, but they haven't been there for quite some time. So why and how did this visit come about, and in attendance of the 15th BRICS Summit?
Yeah, it is interesting to hear a lot of questions, why now, for Indonesia, because I think Jokowi I appreciate the effort of Jokowi to prepare, a lot of best practices and concrete actions that Indonesia has done a lot of great work. So that's what Jokowi did before deciding to be more active into an international forum. And that reflects how Jokowi, led the presidency of the G20, ASEAN, and those presidency or those leaderships were like a good lesson to be shared with South Africa as the current presidency of BRICS. So the reason is not just Indonesia got invited because of the privilege, but I believe that South African President Cyril Ramaphosa with his team also tried to get some, important experience, valuable insights of what Indonesia did throughout the last decade under Jokowi's presidency, with a better infrastructure development and also the international leadership to G20 and ASEAN. So again, this time is still, for me, it's not too late, but it is an important moment because Jokowi is about to end his leadership, but he built so many legacies for Indonesia to strengthen the position and the diplomacy in the world's economy or even in other global issues. And I think that's how important to be a leader of a certain country, not just Indonesia. And Indonesia is also being a role model, I would say, to encourage other ASEAN countries, Asian or even other developing and small island states that southern countries or, this rising up or the developing countries have the same chance and opportunity to collaborate and as well as to compete with the developed nations or the global north countries, because that's what I think I could share my experience when I joined the postgraduate forum of BRICS last week in Cape Town. There is a common, spirit that we had the same vision to empower and to elevate the skills of South academics or researchers. And it is also important to see other way instead of just look up to the north side or the developed nations. Because a lot of people, or maybe some of people, still tend to think that advancement of, to be an advanced countries, to be empowered a certain assets, we need to look further to the west, or we need to look further to the northern countries.
It's been around for a long time.
Yeah, it's been like maybe sort of like a cycle to settle this mindset. So the new mindset is, hey, let's just get another way and try to see other opportunities that our neighbors or even other developing countries also need support. And they also have good aspect. They have some potential assets that we can collaborate. So I think that's the potential purpose of BRICS, and hand in hand, aligning some other soft power, cultural diplomacy with Indonesia. So it's not just all about economy or security and the hard political issues, but we need to explore further the soft power diplomacy, the same historical culture, the cultural assimilations between BRICS nations and Indonesia, as we are, have been occupied by the colonization. So that's another spirit that I think we need to look further.
Yeah, very good point.
Now, on that point, let's go with your gym. Like, when you go to the gym, they say like, hey, your friend's already here. And then the BRICS already invited like Iran, UAE, the Saudi Arabia, Argentina. And then at this point, what exactly is the concern like that we as a country need to look before we join into BRICS? Like, what needs to be addressed, and what kind of concern that we need to before we say yay or nay or whatever it is?
I think I would like to put an analogy like a gym. So when we try to start doing some exercise, there must be like a trial, right?
Yes.
And there's also, as a beginner or newbie, we need to observe some maybe the great gym expert and also the other newbies.
Right.
So that's how Indonesia has to look up and also analyze. So it's good that now BRICS expanded another 6 members with very unique characteristics. So let me start with Iran. Iran has been so controversial with the US, with the disputes and a lot of attacks, but Iran also needs a big support from non-Western friends or non-Western alliances. That's why Iran has a big motivation to join BRICS and to prevent their second largest gases in the world. And after being backed by the Russian, they also need other BRICS member support. But still, this is not the only example. We can also compare with, let's say, Ethiopia. Ethiopia has a great leader under the presidency of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. He won the Nobel Prize because of the peacekeeping and also how to manage very long attacks, long civil wars in Ethiopia. Although he's been, a very prominent leader under Nobel, there has been almost a decade of Tigerian war, and based on New York Times and also some analysis from the World Bank, it needs like $20 billion to recover that war. And then if we compare with, let's say, like this, maybe United Arab Emirates and also Saudi Arabia, those are also another interesting, examples. I think they're more into US, like they rely a lot on Western investments by having, huge glamour, I would say glamour development in Saudi Arabia, but still they also need some non-Western sides to counter their internal disputes within Middle East countries. So there is like another asset that they need to keep and another partner to maybe trade off with their internal dispute or regional disputes. And then Argentina. Argentina is the third largest economic country in Latin America after Brazil and Mexico. But Argentina also got hit so much by pandemic and global financial crisis, and they also need fully recover of their economic development. So seeing these examples by comparing each of the new members, I think that's also a good strategy for Indonesia to step forward for assessing, doing more assessment. And bilateral trade or bilateral partnerships between Indonesia and BRICS are well developed rather than joining this regional or the BRICS partnership itself. So that's why it's also another consideration by comparing different examples of new members, as well as maybe I think maximizing the bilateral partnership that Indonesia had been doing with each member of BRICS. So that's like another consideration as well.
So it's not as simple as like, well, if we join BRICS, then it won't put us in a position against the West, because those that are currently in BRICS, well, they're somewhere in the middle. Some of these nations are somewhere in the middle as well,
yes,
not necessarily on one side or the other. Now, we are still in an undecided status here, but if Indonesia were to join BRICS, what do you see would be the benefits when it comes to businesses or trade, especially for Indonesian companies?
I think it's starting now. So we're being active to BRICS in a softer or soft power diplomacy.
Okay.
So started with the economy, maybe not economic first. Let's say start with the education, research training, or digital economy, or youth empowerment and other marginalized groups. This is a very good potential for waking up the mindset and open more doors. That there are also unique and strong partnership that we can build as a friends. Let's say like making BRICS Indonesia community to be another example how the spirit of Bandung and Asian African Conference could be well maintained. So it's not just a symbolic ceremony, but there is another way to elevate this initiative from Sukarno's presidency. And the next 2 years, 2025, we will have the 17th of the Asian African Conference. And I also got a lot of good feedback from some professors and scholars of South Africa that they are very excited and willing to help to support this celebration, or this spirit to be back. So that's number one. And then number two, if we look further about the cultural history, when I visited Cape Town, I got unexpected finding that back in 1800, there were so many immigrants from Batavia, from Jakarta, especially the religious leaders, Muslim leaders, and slaves being forced to migrate to Cape Town.
There's a book written
And
on this.
it's well documented in one building called the Castle of Good Hope in Cape Town.
Right.
So that history is also another strong point that we need to build, maybe social cultural community like what ASEAN already did, and maybe there is another way to exchange our food, gastro diplomacy, or even the musics. I think it is also more diverse and colorful to do that. And then going bigger to the economy. The economic partnership is being done right now. If I quoted from the national statistic BPS data in 2020 and 2022, there has been like 93.16 billion US dollars by doing investment between Indonesia and BRICS. So that's also a big number, but still maybe we need to make a mapping out and identify which priority of BRICS members that we need to focus on, and what kind of aspect, like from the Ministry of Trade, they say that it needs to have more non-traditional markets, as in like maybe more service partnership based, and that's also another good willing to to build up this partnership, and maybe also try to emphasize the infrastructure development of MSMEs. So we presented a paper, Dina, my student from School of Government and Public Policy. I supervised her research, and we presented about the comparative analysis between MSMEs in Indonesia and South Africa. The similarity was both, both MSMEs contributed a lot, much amount to the GDP, like 60% from South Africa to their national GDP and also Indonesia. But my key point here is both still struggle to the lack of digital access and also the digital divide. There is no equal or inclusive opportunities. And this reflects or resembles what Jokowi said, that there is an unfair global economic order, and also there is a, the spirit of Jokowi's speech is try to wake up and recall the rights to development of each developing countries. So I think by empowering more inclusive market to women, to other vulnerable groups, either between South Africa and Indonesia or Indonesia with other BRICS countries, that can be another alternative way to see further opportunities how to maximize the economic and trade partnerships.
So plenty of potential for growth in these relationships. We're quickly running out of time here, so we're going to get a quick yes or no. From your perspective, in your opinion, you think Indonesia should join BRICS?
Not now.
Not right now. Okay.
That's my answer, because a lot of consideration.
Yeah, you mentioned some of them.
Spectators needs further assessments.
Good point. All right. Thank you so much. We wish we had more time with you, because it's obviously a very, very wide range of topics we could talk about here. But thank you for coming by anyway, and we appreciate having you on and getting your insight on this.
Thank you. Happy Sunday.
Yeah, happy Sunday to you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. That was our postgraduate lecturer from University of Indonesia, Gracia Paramitha, discussing about the 15th BRICS Summit that has just passed in South Africa. We will now take another short break, but a quick reminder for you all to follow us on our socials. We're on Instagram, X, and YouTube at See Today News. We'll be right back.